This presentation was recorded at mvcConf. For more content like this, go to www.mvcconf.com. JetBrains, the leading vendor of professional development tools, now offers a range of new products for .NET developers. In addition to ReSharper, the top-class productivity extension for Visual Studio, you can now use .cover to run coverage analysis for your applications, .trace to find performance bottlenecks, and use TeamCity and UTrack for a perfect combination of continuous integration and issue tracking software. Go to www.jetbrains.com for more information.
My name is Jeffrey Palermo, and I'm so excited to be here today. It's a little tough act to follow John Peterson with that great jQuery talk, and we're going to be diving into some software philosophy and some architecture. I'm going to be showing a little bit of code, but I'm going to mostly be trying to share some experience that I've had and some worldview about how to build ASP.NET MVC applications. And so the tagline of my talk, Solution Architecture, when separation of concerns and don't repeat yourself, don't apply. Okay? And so much of the focus of the MVC framework has been around separation of concerns and drawing out your code to remove all the duplication. And so we're gonna dive into that, and then we're gonna go through some samples that lead us down maybe a rabbit hole, a wrong path, and then we're gonna circle back and see how we can apply them a little more appropriately. So, if you haven't heard of me, well, why the heck would you want to listen to me? And I think I've bolded the most important reason is because I've made tons of mistakes, and I'd like to share the learning that I've gained from making tons of mistakes, and that's espoused in this talk. And so, yeah, I've written an ASP.NET MVC book, first edition and second edition. Yeah, I've had some articles. Yeah, I've been published online, various things, MSDN. But there's a lot of people who've done that too. And so I made tons of mistakes using ASP.NET MVC and corrected those mistakes, and I just want to share the knowledge that I've gained up until this point. So thank you for giving me an hour of your day. I really appreciate it. I know your time is very valuable, and so thank you for giving me this hour. My hope is that you'll come away with my core lesson really understood, and that is to apply principles when appropriate, not always. For instance, we're always told, always do this, always do that. We got principles. We should always separate concerns. We should always remove duplication. And that can get us in trouble sometimes. And it's certainly gotten me in trouble, okay? And so we've seen these bantered around the layered architecture, separating this, iterating, all that stuff. I'm going to fast forward. Okay, I'm going to fast forward to the end of my talk and give you the bottom line right now so that you can see the argument that I'm making through each of the examples. Okay, so what I want a couple of the main takeaways to be is that it's not always appropriate to remove duplication. Okay, it's not always. It's not all or nothing. Okay, it's also not always appropriate to separate concerns. Okay? Now, each of these principles is good, and they need to be tools that are in your tool belt. But it's not an all-or-nothing game. Okay? It's not always appropriate to apply them. And we'll see why as we walk through the examples. That if you can apply a little perspective, if you can apply a little balance, then you'll end up with a better result in the end. Okay? So don't take them as you must do this, you must do that. I know that's a lot of the focus of the MVC framework because of the challenges of previous versions of ASP.NET. But my caution is don't take it at face value. You really got to think about it. And so in this talk, I am going to be going in detail. I'm going to be looking at context specifically. What I am not going to do is give you some broad guidance and say, oh, you have to decide when to use dry. You have to decide when to use separate concerns. I'm going to walk through a very, very specific example and tug at it. Now, this is one of the struggles with talks, especially when I have a live audience in front of me. I don't know if you guys are falling asleep. I don't know if you guys are laughing or whatnot. And so, actually, I do have a side monitor where I'm monitoring the IRC chat. So if you're on the IRC chat, just go ahead and give me some feedback and say hi. Let me know that you're there. I've got my side monitor going. And, okay, we got a couple people still awake. That's great. So I'm going to be monitoring this to get some live feedback. Okay, somebody telling me I suck. That's great, all right? I like the laughs, because now if we were at Tech Ed, that's a little bit different story. But so I'm going to be going through some very specific examples throughout this talk, and I've kept it really, really simple so I can drive the point home. And that's one of the dangers of these talks, that, the example was so simple that it's not real world, okay? So we're going to take this example, and you're going to have to use your imagination that, say you have 100 different examples in the same system and what that would look like. But let's go through it, okay? Let's go through it. So you and I, all 360 of you, we are going to build a system together, okay? And it's going to start out really, really simple, and we're going to start it, but we're always going to be looking forward to how it's going to look 6 months from now, a year from now, how we're going to maintain it, how we're going to operate it, things like that. So let's build this system together. What's it going to look like? And we're going to focus on the architecture, the overall architecture of this ASP.NET MVC app. Okay, we're not going to be diving into, particular view things, partial views, action filters, all the different pieces of ASP.NET MVC. This is an application architecture talk, okay? So we have a work order system that we need to build for a school district, okay? And this is a sample screen. A teacher is going to go and create a new work order. Let's say, Jane Appleseed, a 6th grade science teacher, has a broken chair or a projector that's not working, something in the classroom, something to do with facilities, that's a work order category, and there's an online work order system, okay? So we're going to make this work order system. And yes, I am using Balsamic for this quick mock-up. So yes, it is. Now, we've got title, description. I'm going to keep it really simple. I know we can imagine, work orders need, a couple more date fields, a couple of this, a couple of that. We're keeping it really simple, okay? I don't want to have any extraneous concepts out here. So let's go with that. So the one thing I want you to focus on is that we have a few fields, and then the created by, or the owner of the work order is the name of the teacher and then the job title, okay? So this is also a sample listing. When we're going to list work orders, say we list, we list the, top 100 or something sorted by status. We're going to show the title, description, submitter, who it was fulfilled by, if it is finished, and then the status of it. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. This is our example that we're going to dig into. All right. Now, first of all, let's see what it looks like when we apply the dry principle. Okay, let's normalize our database. And guys, I'm not going to go into relational theory right now, but if you don't know what the different normal forms are of a relational database, I highly encourage you to just look it up online and get a quick understanding of that. Most of you guys, even if you've never been educated in relational theory at all, probably just intuitively understand first normal form, because that's typically required just to get a functional database working and separate the individual fields. However, this is what we're driving for here. Is we've gone to third normal form, where we've separated out the submitter into a teacher table. And for this example, yeah, we could say that there would be some facilities people who would be fulfilled by it. But imagine that, teacher table is broad definition. There's also maybe the maintenance guy is also in that table, and his job title is maintenance guy, okay, for instance. And so this is a very, very simple database table, and we've tried to keep the duplication out of this. Now, very simple controller screen to list the work orders. And it looks a little bit like a link to SQL there. We got it right there in the controller action, and we're getting the work orders. We're ordering by status. But then, in order to satisfy those screens, We also need to have some more code. I don't want to list all the code. I want to keep it simple, but there's got to be more code in here to get the teachers and get them up to the view so that we can list the job titles next to the name and whatnot. And we're also going to have to send that in, add that to view data so that the view can list out the work orders and also the teacher and the proper job title and whatnot. Okay, so all's good so far. But in any system, it all starts out pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We're just managing some data until, guess what? We get a new business rule. Okay? New business rule. So here it is. Once a work order is closed, it should be sealed and never modified again. All right? Give me some feedback in the IRC chat. Has anyone had a business rule that sounds anything like that? Once something gets to a certain status, it should not be modified again. Right? Anyone out there? We got a couple of you guys? Okay, yeah, and once it gets to a certain status, you shouldn't be able to delete it. In other words, it's done, right? Once that thing gets to a certain status, sorry, it needs to be locked in. Not a single field modified. I mean, whether you're in the accounting space, purchase orders, this type of business rule is so common out in the space, okay? So let's talk about how to deal with it because it's so common. I wanted to find a really good example that a lot of people could identify with. So how do we implement this particular business rule in what is right now a very, very simple application? So of course, we need to add status to work order. There we go. Simple field onto the table there. And then, our listing of work orders, this is what it's going to look like. If you notice, Giacomo became a 4th grade math teacher some time ago, but while he was a 3rd grade math teacher, he had a few work orders. Okay, and Joe fixed a lot, fixed those things that were wrong, and then closed the work order, and so those things cannot change, right? So we see in the table that the in progress and the draft work order by Giacomo do have his new job title, because he has a new job title, and the old ones have the old job title, because our business rule is once it's closed, we seal that work order. Okay, so that's what it looks like on the screen. Okay. Now, let's go back to our database model. Let's see what it takes to keep that duplication out of the model. And this is one way we could go. Now this is the job title, but for instance, say Jane Appleseed gets married. Well, now the name changes, right? So if we're going to keep this database completely normalized so that we don't repeat any attributes, then it may lead us down the path to do this. And having teacher have a names one-to-many table, that may seem a little bit extreme, but I want to get your attention because I think job titles and names, they're the same type of thing where you have multiple job titles with dates and now, but if we normalize to this level, we would then be forced to take the seal date or some sort of date and compare the dates of the job titles table and then find out what was the teacher's job title at the time that the work order was sealed, okay, in order to fulfill that business rule. Now, what have we done to this model? We have really, really rigorously applied the don't repeat yourself mantra, okay? We have. Now, what type of code does it lead to? Well, the simple answer is a lot more code, okay? Now, again, it wouldn't fit on the screen, but you guys in the IRC window, can you imagine how long this controller action would be in order just to navigate that structure? Any feedback there? And yes, separating the names is a bit much. I agree. Separating the job titles is a bit much, and we'll see that in a minute. Okay? Now, so there's a lot of code there because now we have to go to a different table to get job titles, and we have to compare dates. We have to go to a different table to get what Jane Appleseed's name is because she might have gotten married. The name changes, but we have to retain the old name. All right, so let's look at this. In our model, we've tried to not repeat ourselves, not have attributes more than once. And yes, we started off with a very simple, structure that has everything right there in the controllers. And by the way, it is not a good idea to put all of this crap right there in a controller action. Okay, so let's see where this takes us, because this controller action balloons up. We have a lot more code to deal with the structure of our model, and it's just not going to work, right? It's just not going to work. You can't put all this code in the controllers, because finding the proper job title of the teacher is not just a work order controller list action concern. I mean, we're going to have to do that in some other places. And so we would have to copy that code around, and now we're back to don't repeat yourself. So let's just fast forward. This is just one business rule, and this is just one type of thing that would change our model and what we encounter. And yeah, we could take it through completion, but let's just fast forward. Let's save some time here. This is just the first business rule. We are going to have lots of business rules that we have to implement, and we need a way of approaching it so that it's sustainable just mentally, okay? So we're going to have a second business rule and a third business rule and a fourth. I mean, how many business rules do you typically have? What, hundreds? And so we need a way to manage this without making our code just so difficult. So we need some separation of concerns, right? We can't just keep on making our controller actions larger. We need to add in separation of concerns. Now, let's go ahead and separate out these concerns. Instead of just one web project and just everything in the controllers and our database, let's look at the Visual Studio solution on the left, and let's look at what we can split out. So we can split out data access. We can split out a core project that has some core stuff, and I would put work order and teacher in core, but I don't want to muddle this graphic here. And then we would have to have some dedicated view models that match up to the screen, because our core entities don't match up to the screen. Our core entities are dry. They're very normalized. And so we need some view models. You see teacher select display, work order list display, those that match up to what the screen actually needs to show, and we can map from there. So we would need to add quite a few concepts here. We need to add some display templates, some model binders, and we'd have to have some action filters in there, some partial views. Now, in order to manage all this separation, we have to have our inversion of control container, because there's just so many things going on. We've created a problem now, and inversion of control is the fancy shiny toy that can solve that problem, okay? Get sarcasm, keep it, there we go. We're going to have to separate the data access. I talked about the dedicated view models. And because we have dedicated view models, we need some mechanism to map from our core entities and value types into the view models. Now we can just write left hand, right hand code all day long, or we could use an auto mapper library to do it. But are you guys tired yet? I mean, we're just implementing simple business rules. Are you guys tired of all these concepts? I mean, what the heck? We're trying to separate out these concerns, and we're having to do all this work. This is just a simple work order system, okay? Now, I am taking this a little bit past a balanced point and trying to go a little bit extreme to get your guys' attention, because this doesn't work. It doesn't. It just doesn't work. And I know there's no such thing as a simple system, and that's why we kind of go down this road when we have one business rule and two business rules and 10 business rules. But adding all of these concepts in the name of separation of concerns just is not a workable solution. In practice, it leads to so much code and infrastructure just to get some new things working. And then things are so spread out, you have to almost spend a lot of time or be the guy who was there since the inception of the system to understand where all the disparate moving parts are. Bringing on a new programmer is very difficult. There's a lot of training. Any of you guys out there on the IRC chat brought on a new programmer, and it just took forever to get ramped up on the system, not because the business domain was complicated, but because there was just code everywhere doing little things. Okay, we hear a lot of emphatic yes. Yep. I mean, it's happened to me. Some of the applications where we have separated these concerns to the nth degree, it happens, even to this day maintaining them. So, this is not a workable solution. So let's go back to the beginning, okay, and review. Let's go back. How did we get here? We hardly even started. How did we get here? Well, we started with modeling. We removed the duplication. We said, we want to keep all this information. We want to store job titles once and only once. We want to store names once and only once. We want to make sure that we don't have duplication, because each of us has, we've been hurt. We're gun shy. We've been hurt in the past by rampant duplication, and we need to remove that. Then we implemented the screens to the requirements, and the code that came out of that was, I guess, the spec. The code that came out was the spec, but what we found when we looked at the code that came out was the controller actions were really big, okay, and there was a lot of stuff in there when we added the business rule. And so what happened after that is we separated out the concerns. We noticed that there were a lot of individual things that we had to do, a lot of data that we had to compare, little annotations here and there we had to compare back and forth. And so we separated that out so that it wouldn't be all in the controller action, and put it in its appropriate spot, because, well, we have to look forward to other business rules and whatnot. And then the concept count just exploded. All these concepts that we have to introduce just to get a few more business rules added, and the bottom line, man, the complexity just got way out of hand. The complexity, that's just one business rule. You get up to 10, and you're thinking, okay, I got a separated solution. I got 10 business rules here, and you got things going everywhere, and you have to jump from file to file to file to file to file just to see what's going on. And complexity is what kills our software. Now, this work order system, is it a complex domain? Let's just back up. Let's get out of the technology, and let's just describe what we're really doing here. We need to, list the work orders, allow the teacher to create a work order, the maintenance crew to go in and look them up and mark them, mark the status when they're done. And we got a rule that says, hey, whenever the work order is done, we need to seal it so it's never modified again. I mean, is that a complicated domain? It took me less than a minute to describe the domain. That is not a complicated domain. So it's not acceptable for us to have a really complex solution to such a simple domain. Now, when we're talking about the 100th business rule, then we can talk relative to that. But when we're talking about just one business rule so far, do we make such design leaps when we're implementing the first business rule? No. The complexity is not warranted. Okay, so how do we go back and fix that? And how does the complexity start? Okay? I mean, we were all on the don't repeat yourself bandwagon and separating concerns. So let's go back to the beginning. What do we have here? Well, we have our regular table. This is pretty simple, actually. And the only problem we would encounter here is if a teacher goes away and the teacher drops out from the teacher table. And so how do we preserve teachers that have left the district 10 years ago, and there's some work orders in the system archived and sealed for those purposes? Well, the status began this whole saga. So, the status is appropriate because that's a business concern. The business people really key off of the status, and that the business rule is around that. But when sealing the work order, do we really need to remove duplication? Do we really need to separate the concerns? Now, we removed duplication first, and we started with normalizing the database schema. That's what we started with, right? It seemed like a good idea at the time. Let's flip that around, okay? let's separate the concerns of the model first, okay? Instead of making it dry, instead of removing duplication, separate the concerns of the model first. Let's see where that takes us. So let's look at these concepts and the complex model that we ended up with at the top right, and then a new, simpler model is at the bottom right. Now, what is a work order? Picture it from a business person's point of view. They used to have a piece of paper, okay, and it had the title, the description, who the submitter was, what their job title was, status, and it was on a piece of paper, okay? And so the definition of work order is all the fields on that piece of paper, okay? So let's put all of those data attributes in the work order table, right? And let's keep the teacher table focused on being concerned about teachers. Let the work order table be concerned about modeling a work order, and the teacher table be concerned about the teacher. Now, we might get a knot in our stomach because we see submitter name and submitter title, and we think, but wait a minute, we're duplicating, okay? And so that little knot in our stomach sort of led us down a different path. But let's think about it a different way. The submitter name on the work order is not the same concept as teacher first name or teacher last name. Teacher needs a first name and a last name, and they need to be kept separate, and they are separate concepts. And we have the code concatenating first name and last name to put it on the work order screen, the work order list screen. But the submitter name as a part of the work order is a unique concept that really doesn't care about first name, last name. It's just, hey, the name. Okay, I need the name of the submitter. And the title means something to work order. And it's different from the teacher's job title. Okay? So if we really look at the essence of those concepts and separate those concerns in the modeling, which is the heart of the entire application, then we would be led down a path more similar to this. Furthermore, work order would have everything it takes to show the work order, and so the submitter ID foreign key back to the teacher table, we could make it nullable. Why? Because a work order from 10 years ago doesn't need a foreign key back to a teacher record that is no longer valid. The teacher left, retired, long ago. Why does the teacher table need to hang on to records only for the purpose of feeding a few of the data points to a work order screen? Because we know teacher tables or employee tables are never this small. They always have, 50 other properties, that HR has added to them. We know they're never this small. They've got all kinds of things going for them. But if we need, this entire teacher record must forevermore stick around. Because what? A work order screen needs a couple of attributes that happen to be a part of that record? That's not a good trade-off, okay? So let's go with submitter name, submitter title. Put that right there in the work order. Let's make the submitter ID nullable and separate the concerns of the model first, okay? Now, everybody's situation is different. Everybody has little variants of business rules, and so you are going to have to think for yourself. But in this example, we're completely separating the concerns of what it means to be a teacher and what it means to be a work order. All right? Now, as a result, what does that mean? It means when I get the work orders in a list, I can order by status, and guess what? The work order has everything I need to display on that list screen. I don't need any more of that crufty code. Now, we can talk about at what level do we still separate out this data access into a repository class or something else instead of putting a link to SQL or an Hibernate or any framework call directly in the controller action. We can have that discussion. That's different. I didn't want to clutter it up here. We can have that discussion. However, what we don't have is, I got the work orders, but I also have to make sure I get the right teacher information. And then, let's munge that into a dedicated view model that is specifically for the work order list screen. So here, the work order object itself corresponds to the list screen, okay? It speaks the name of the business. The business is saying, hey, when I list the work orders, I need to see these particular items. And so, heck, you just let the business model for you, and the work order object can have all of that stuff in it. And so you can just get them, order them the right way, send them directly to the view, and then bind them up in some of the HTML helpers and display them. No translation, you don't have to aggregate any other data, and you don't have to have a dedicated work order view model because your core entity reflected how the business thinks about that concept, okay? Now, what about the code structure? Notice that I removed a separated data access project. I removed a separated core project. I removed the bootstrapper project. If we don't have as many transitions to go through and all these various things everywhere, then do we really need even the IOC container to wire up things? We separated our concerns in the modeling, okay? And that had a ripple effect out through the rest of the code. And when we have a very simple model that speaks the language of the business, the code that leverages the model doesn't end up as complex, and you don't end up with a lot of duplication because the concepts are very specific, okay? So we probably still need some model binders and, maybe some small other pieces. But by and large, we do not have to worry about so many of the other infrastructure pieces that would otherwise be needed in a completely completely normalized model and separated out, concerns at the Visual Studio solution level. Now, big picture, big picture, big picture. We want to keep it simple, okay? Now, when we're talking about don't repeat yourself, what do we say? Well, if you repeat yourself all over the place, if you have tons of duplication all over the place, you're going to drown in complexity. So let's keep it simple. Let's remove all duplication. Well, what we found in this example is, okay, if we start with removing duplication, that can lead to complexity if we don't have the right perspective. So it's not an all or nothing game, okay? It's not an all or nothing game. We have to look at everything. So how do we do this? How do we think? And by the way, I'm keeping time open for questions. I know that some of you have questions. I'm keeping time open for questions, and we're going to have time for that. So let's go down. How do you think about this? Because it's a little bit abstract, but it's really easy to make it concrete. So I'm going to give you some prescriptive guidance, okay? And this is, by the way, I am not infallible. I have been wrong, and I will continue to be wrong in the future, all right? Don't believe me, just what I say. Think about what I'm telling you, ponder it, and decide what nugget of this talk is applicable in your situation, okay? So first, start with modeling. That is the center of the world in a code base. And whether or not you espouse the classes or objects first or database tables first, it doesn't matter. Draw boxes on the board, okay? And whether you take those boxes on the whiteboard and do your C# classes first, or whether you take those boxes and do your database tables first, I don't care. It doesn't make a difference to me. But start with the modeling. Draw those boxes on the board and separate the concerns first. Separate the concerns in modeling. Everything you do in modeling is going to have ripple effects to the rest of your code. And so if you don't have your model right, you're going to suffer big time in other areas of the code. And so think about making those concerns very, very specific. I mean, it's easy when we think about polymorphism and we have an abstract class that defines a method, we think, oh yeah, all the derived classes could just implement that method and each one will do something completely different. However, we'll tie it back and we'll all be able to talk about it in the same way. Well, you can apply a similar concept when you're looking at the model. Think about how they differ. Don't think, oh, there's going to be a there's going to be a property or there's going to be a database column that's called job title. Therefore, I want one and only one column that has these job titles. That's, that right there takes away our ability to properly separate concerns, because the job title that is part of the work order is not the same business concept as the current job title of the teacher in the active teachers table. Okay? The work order job title is at the time that the work order was going, and when it's closed, it's going to be old news. And the teacher's going to go away, but we still need to have the work order. So that job title, it may have the same name, but come on, in business, we have the same name for all kinds of different things. Have you ever gone to different departments of your company and asked them, hey, so let's model a customer. What is a customer? How many data attributes does a customer have? Let's work through this. And have you had any departments ever agree on what the exact same term means? Right now I should be seeing a lot of no's in the IRC chat window, because I know that every single one of your businesses have, one, multiple terms for the same thing, and two, one thing that has multiple terms. Or, excuse me, that has one term that is actually multiple things. Okay? So, separate the concerns first. Even though it may be called the same thing, think about the essence of what it is and break that apart and make it stand alone and make it unique and very specific. Okay? Once you have done that, then look to duplication. Okay? And what we have found, what I have found, is that when we properly separate the concerns of our model, we end up with less accidental duplication. But when we attempted to remove duplication first in our model, we ended up with a lot more duplication in the code that we then had to work really, really hard to try to separate concerns. But we were separating concerns of symptom problems. We weren't really tackling the root problem. Okay? So separate concerns first, then remove duplication, and then attempt to remove duplication by separating concerns. So, come back to it and say, okay, I have duplication. Do I have duplication because of this one particular part, or do I have some systemic duplication that might be caused by some muddled concerns in my model? So could I take the duplication and reverse history and cause it just to not be there by going back to the model and separating a few more concerns? Okay? Now, raising the thinking up another level, thinking about how the business thinks about their own processes, the code, and by the way, feel free to tweet this or quote me on it, whatever you want. The code should mirror the real world, or even programmers will have a hard time understanding it. Okay? The code should mirror the real world. I know that some of you know what I'm talking about. When you go into a system and you get a business description of what it's doing, and then you go look at the code and it's like, well, what the heck is this code doing? I understand the business domain, but this code is doing all kinds of weird things that aren't really appropriate in this business. Okay? I mean, imagine explaining the system back to your business partner, and they say, hey, so this work order from a year ago, we got a problem with it. Oh yeah, what's that? Well, it says Jane Johnson, Jane Appleseed submitted that work order. Oh yeah, well, let me tell you about your business. Let me tell you about your system. So work order doesn't actually have a submitter on it. Work order has a little token where we can go find the teacher. And we'll go find the teacher, and we'll make sure that the proper name is, because if we correct a typo, then we want it to be automatic. We don't want to have correct a typo there and then it be not reflected in the work order, and so that's why because she got married, it's natural, right? And then they come back and say, no, that's not at all how we work. You don't understand our business at all. Before you put this newfangled system in place, I had this stack of work orders, and every year we did an audit and we went back to these work orders, and unless there was some whiteout on one of those work orders, that piece of information was exactly what someone wrote on it a year ago, 6 months ago. And yes, some of them had typos, and yes, some of them had bad handwriting, but that didn't matter. It worked. Your application that automatically updates past, closed, sealed work orders just because Jane Appleseed got married? I don't know what you were thinking. I mean, but of course, from the programmer's perspective, we're thinking, oh, well, proper normal form. This is just how it's done. And we get so caught up in the technical things that we lose sight of how the business folks really need to run their business and understand how their system is working. And if it requires the programmer to even understand what the system is doing and the users are surprised, then we really need to go back and look at the model and see if it's designed appropriately. Okay, I've left some time. I think we have 13 minutes. Questions, tomatoes, anything you might have when we glance at this IRC. Just see if there's any questions there. And Zane, if you have any questions built up, just feel free to jump in here.
No, it's looking good here. Do you see the questions in the live meeting there?
Let's see, Q&A. Let's see here. It says Q&A 5, but I don't see any questions popping up. Well, wait, let me see. Okay, so one comment is, you were describing the advantages of CQRS, domain-driven design aggregates, and bounded contexts. And I'm actually glad that you commented on that, because command query response separation that's a very specific technique that I didn't demonstrate here. But if you implemented CQRS, what you are doing is modeling the tasks of the system based on a very separated modeling of commands and then queries and response, and separating those out. And so yes, it's very, very similar, and CQRS affects how the system is modeled. And I think that you can separate the concerns of the model without using CQRS, but if you are using CQRS, you will be separating the concerns of the model. Domain-driven design aggregates and bounded contexts, that I don't see a direct correlation, but you could definitely mesh these principles in some unique ways. Okay. Let's see. Hi, Jeff. We are using the chat to discuss our points of view about simplicity and another concern that an architect must have. We must try to figure out the correct size of the scenario. If it is something tiny, we don't have to model a spaceship just to go to the other side of the street, right? You are absolutely right. If it's something tiny, well, I'll make a bold statement. If it's something tiny, you don't need object-oriented programming. Boom! I said it. All right? Let the flaming begin. If it's something tiny, then you can take something really small, throw a little bit of code in there, and you're done. You're done. Why do we need to make it any more complex than that? Okay? We know that things grow over time, and we're always thinking, oh, is something going to bite us in the future? Am I painting myself in the corner? Things like that. But also keep in mind that when you're building a system, and I know that we're big on web systems, we're talking about ASP.NET MVC. When I'm building a web application with ASP.NET MVC, don't assume that every function has to be in the same web app. Scaling it out with a web form is not the only approach. Okay? For instance, if I have this system that's running, and I've got a couple different departments that need to use this system, and I've got purchasing, and I've got accounting, and maybe I've got management, and some other things, yeah, we can put all the stuff, and we can certainly divide it up into areas. But that application is going to get pretty large. And if we've separated the concerns of the model, I think we can manage it. It's manageable. But the security gets more complicated because we have not separated the concerns as far as the security model. For instance, we're going to have a role of purchasing. We're going to have a role of management. We're going to have a role of accounting department. And there are certain screens that only one of those roles can get to. And on some of the screens, we may say, because they're all logging into the same app, we say, you know what, this particular column or this particular function on this screen, the purchasing and accounting can both use this screen, but only purchasing can press that button. So when an accountant is looking at it, make sure to disable that button. Well, now we're getting into a really hairy problem because we don't have separation of our security model. We have one screen that two very different constituencies are trying to use at the same time. Whereas, let's see how we can solve that problem. Have an ASP.NET MVC system that has separated modules, okay? Separate the modules. In other words, you will have three IIS websites, three, maybe virtual webs, whatever it happens to be, running in separate processes, separate web applications that tie together at the UI level and through URLs, and so it's all seamless. But at the top level, you put your security boundary around the whole thing, and you don't have the accountants and the purchasers, both going to the same screen, because chances are they use that screen for very different purposes, and they really need screens that are a little bit different instead of trying to, wedge them both into the same screen and then have some if statements to turn off a column or turn off a button here and there. So you can keep the security model simpler by saying, you know what, either you have access to this module or you don't. Plain as day. And the accountants go and they log in, and then they're routed to the module that they have access to, and then maybe you have a core where everybody has access to all of the basic stuff, and that's fine. But munging security concerns within the same screens and the same app will also get us into trouble. So think about that when you're separating those core concerns as well. Why not abstract the model complexity by using stored procedures? That will allow you to keep the data in fourth or fifth normal form, which has many scalability advantages, and also keeps some of that complexity you speak about out of the application using the same concepts you just described. By the way, great presentation. There's a lot to be said about a common sense approach to describe, even if it deviates from the best practice patterns. So let me tackle the last sentence first. That what I just said deviates from the best practice patterns. I've done a whole lot of study, and I like looking back in the industry, and just recently I reread Fred Brooks's masterpiece, The Mythical Man Month, and all the essays in there, and I've been reading Capers Jones, and some of the people who've been around in this industry, for some of them for as long as I've been alive. And I'm really trying to learn from those guys. And it's not new concepts that I think that I'm talking about here. It's I think some concepts that a lot of us in the industry might have forgotten over time, because modeling is technology agnostic. And so if we talk about separating concerns in the model first, it doesn't matter if we're using a particular technology or not. That's just a design principle. Now, when we talk about fourth or fifth normal form, many scalability advantages, I think the advantages to fourth and fifth normal form are in the data space. I think we get scalability, if we're talking about scalability here now, not just complexity of management, if we're talking about scalability, I think the advantages that will give us scalability are eliminating joins in the database. Anytime you join two tables together in a database, you slow it down. And so if you can have a single table read, you're always going to be faster than if you have to join two together. So if most of the scenarios in that work order list or seeing a single work order don't even have to go to the teacher table, if I'm just looking at a work order, I don't have to go to the teacher table, I've eliminated the need to do that join, and that makes it more scalable. Now, stored procedures, whether or not you do it in code or in stored procedures, the same code of getting it from, removed duplication back into a denormalized form, which, by the way, the screens that you show on the screen, they're flat, okay? So if we store it in this format that's super sliced and diced, then we've got a lot of work to put all those pieces back together to get the data looking like something that the business user can use. Okay, so I don't think the answer is okay, hold on. The different normal forms are valuable. There's no question about that. And I am not advocating abandoning normal forms in the database. I think separating out the concerns in the model to identify more specific concepts will lead us to put a submitter name in the work order table as a unique piece of data instead of the first name and last name in the teacher table. And going to fifth normal form, you can still do that. We've identified them as unique and distinct pieces of data. Now, yes, if you did a trend, 90-something% would be the same, but then you would have the people who, got married. Same thing with job title, okay? So it's not the same concept. And so I think you can still go to fifth normal form if you really like doing that and separate out those concepts and identify concepts at a higher level of granularity. Jeff, is this a talk on balance? Because I remember watching a screencast on the onion architecture you did a while ago. Or has your mind changed? So when I first wrote the blog series on onion architecture, I was applying dry principle first, and I was applying dry principle first, and then doing separation of concerns, and that I've learned from that and realized that the core of the onion needs to be separated better because there ended up being too many layers in the resulting applications. Now, onion architecture concept is very, very simple. It says put your model in the middle and have the direction of dependency toward the center. Okay, and one way of dependencies, unidirectional dependencies. Don't have your model calling out to the UI or calling out to a web service, calling out. Always have the stuff going to the center. And that defines the main principles of the onion architecture, and that is still sound, and I need to continue that series on my blog. But the implementation of the model, which is the center of the onion, I have learned that the concepts need to be made more granular and focus more on separating the concept concerns. Next question. Expanding your thoughts, in 80% of the cases, view models are unnecessary complication. Any comments? Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I agree. I look at dedicated view models now as a result of a core application model, core entities and value types where there's data points all over the place that need to be pulled up into a manner that the user can consume on the screen. And the view model is actually a lot closer to the model that the business user understands. And so the closer we can get the view models to the core entities, the better. And I think the answer is that using view models all the time is not a good extreme to go to. Use view models where appropriate. For instance, view models are very appropriate on edit screens where you need to, say, fill a drop-down box with a few particular items, and you're not going to have a specific model that is exactly the way the drop-down needs to be. So you need a view model in order to represent how the drop-down needs to be to help out with data entry. Okay, so it's all a balance. It's not all or nothing. Hello, while I have used patterns you have outlined extensively along with other, like simple iterative partitioning, I find a significant gap in most DDD and CQRS presentations to be the lack of addressing security patterns. Okay, you submitted this question before I talked about security, and I'm not, I didn't go into, it's not a security talk, but at a high level, think about separation of concerns for security as well. That would be my cursory response to that. If the business does want to have updates applied to the old work orders, then is normalizing appropriate? Are you really just saying we should understand the domain? Well, yes, I'm saying you should understand the domain, because the more you understand it, the more you'll model it like the business people think. And I think that normalizing is good, but sometimes I think we think, or I have thought that I was normalizing when I was really combining two concerns that needed to be separated just because they were the same data type. They had maybe the same origin and then diverted in usage and whatnot. Sort of.
This presentation was recorded at mvcConf. For more content like this, go to www.mvcconf.com.